Hello, welcome to video 5A. Video 5 has caused some technical challenges and video 6 is already uploaded. So part of the problem for this video may be that it went too long. Therefore, I am splitting it up into two videos, 5A and 5B. This particular video will be about the root causes of the crisis in the city as they're related to education. We know that students do not all walk into the schoolhouse with the same background, the same resources. Students have varying levels of wealth, and they have varying levels of stability at home. The issue is that um, in in terms of coming into school, we often act like children are blank slates. That's what's happening at home and in the larger community doesn't really matter, and that all that matters is teaching, is the teacher and the curriculum and things like that. But any common sense will tell you that that's not true. Across the United States, Blacks make up 15.8% of the student population, yet 45% of high poverty, yet they are 45% are in high poverty schools. Latinos make up 23.7% of the overall student population, but 30.8% of high poverty schools. In California, we know that this is higher, that these numbers are higher, these percentages of the student population are higher. And so we have a real divide. A school in Santa Ana looks very different than a school in Irvine, looks very different from a school in Mission Viejo. And because of that, the schools have different kinds of challenges. To meet these challenges, high poverty schools get additional California state and federal resources. This has been a fairly recent innovation where schools don't get money just on the basis of the number of students, but also the type of students. But it's a fairly new kind of funding, and we don't have a lot of good long-term results from those experiments. Some of the challenges facing schools in terms of delivering a higher quality education in high poverty areas. One has to do with school readiness. A child coming into kindergarten, what kind of background do they have? Have they heard a lot of language? Have people talked to them a lot? Were they in a high quality preschool program? Did they have books at home? Were they read to at home? And then the economic background matters as well. What were they worried about whether they are going to get their next meal? Are they concerned that the housing might not be there next week? Are they have they had a really unstable housing and home life? Um, is there violence or other abuse at home? All of these things can impact school readiness, and they continue throughout the child's K-12 career. Sometimes these school readiness issues spill over into student behavior issues. So a student who has challenges outside of school may bring those issues into school and act out. This causes them to be disciplined, and the discipline creates a negative feedback loop. So I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm being disciplined. I've been bad, I'm being disciplined, therefore I'm a bad person. It can also create a hostility to schools in general. And so the student behavior spills out over the entire school, because a highly disrupted school is one where even students without challenges have more difficulty learning. Another kind of issue is how much parental support the schools have. Um, um, parents who are middle class and wealthy invest a lot of resources in their children. This is everything from extracurricular activities to trips that vacations to places that will expand the students' cultural and historical understanding, and tutoring, and when children need it, to the kinds of interactions that parents have at home. But parental support can also extend to the schools. How much can the schools depend on parents complying with directions from the school, and how much can the schools expect from students in terms of contributions to the school, in terms of volunteer hours, in terms of donations, etc. This parental support can make a huge difference in the kind of schools that we have. And in high poverty areas, parents don't have a lot of time because they're working multiple jobs to keep food on the table, and they don't have a lot of extra resources to put into donations. It may also mean that parents are unable to provide the basic kind of school equipment that schools have come to expect their that their students have. Things like paper and pencils and erasers and glue and crayons. Um, 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 and as students get older, 3-ring binders and um, 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 protractors and calculators and things like that. If there isn't this kind of support, it means that the schools are having to pick it up, which or have the students do without, which eats into learning effectiveness. The allocation of resources, the way schools allocate their resources, are also impacted by whether or not they're a high poverty school. And an easy way to look at this is that if you have a lot of English language learners, you're going to need a different type of curriculum and different kinds of supports in the school than if you're pretty confident that the vast majority of students will speak English coming in. Another issue is textbooks. Textbooks are a really interesting kind of challenge for schools. In middle class and wealthier schools, schools tend to send home textbooks with students, and then the faculty can assign homework out of those textbooks. In poorer schools, there's a lot of student turnover. It's not at all uncommon for 80% of the students who are in class on the last day of school to not have been in that class on the first day of school. That their parents have moved across school or across district lines during the course of the school year. And high poverty schools have a lot more of this turnover than do wealthier schools. Um, if you have that kind of coming and going, you're more reluctant to send textbooks home, because if somebody leaves suddenly, they're a lot less likely to turn in the textbooks. And so they have high poverty schools have a real issue with losing textbooks to moves. Therefore, they don't send the textbooks home at the same rate. So if you consider like a math class, and you have a teacher who wants to assign homework, but the student's not able to take the textbook home, and the teacher's ability to make photocopies is limited for copyright issues and also for limitations on the number of copies a teacher's allowed to make, it makes assigning homework very challenging, which means that the students who are in wealthier schools who have textbooks are able to get a lot more practice and drilling and things like that in. In literature classes, they're able to read the stories at home and then use the class time for discussing them and critical thinking skills and things like that. Where in high poverty schools, they actually have to do the basic reading in class. And so those kind of things matter. Another issue is counselors. The National Counselor Association has recommended that there be one counselor for every 250 students. In California, across the board, there's one counselor for every 650 students. The challenge here is that in the wealthier families can make up the resources that counselors provide in schools. So if a student, a middle class student, needs psychotherapy, for instance, a lot of times their parents have access to health insurance and can get that psychotherapy, and that takes a burden off of the kind of counseling a counselor does in the school. Another thing is that counselors help children prepare, or high schoolers prepare for college and take the test, fill out the FAFSAs, select the colleges that they're going to apply to, actually fill out the applications, get the letters of recommendation, all of that. Because the counselors are overwhelmed with kind of basic duties, many times they're unable to provide this kind of college readiness advice, and also advice for students who are not planning to go to college in terms of what they can and do end up doing in instead of a college education. Wealthy parents, of course, can provide college admissions counselors, private college admissions counselors. And the list goes on in terms of being able to get tutoring and being able to navigate the system, things like that. With the counselor overwhelm, it really puts kids who can't afford outside resources at a disadvantage. Finally, there's the issue of AP classes and other kinds of college readiness preparation. It is not at all unusual for the poor school in the district to have only 7 AP classes, whereas the wealthier school in the district will have 15 or more. And so these kinds of challenges permeate our schools, particularly our high poverty schools. How does this affect the challenges of poverty in the community at large? Well, if students are not as well educated as their suburban, rural, wealthier counterparts, it means that the community the students are embedded in is going to have a more challenging time. They're not going to be able to send as many of their students to college, which means they're not bringing back those high level educational resources. It also means that companies are less likely to invest in the area if the workforce has a weaker the workforce in the area has a weaker educational attainment. And so all of these things kind of perpetuate the crisis in the cities. And the Christopher Commission and the Watts Commission all pointed to the weakness of high poverty schools as one of the challenges of the crisis of the cities.